What if the Earth suddenly stopped spinning? What would happen to our planet and to us? This question has been asked by many people over the years, and there is no one definitive answer. But what we do know is that it would cause some major changes to our world as we know it. So let's take a moment to explore this hypothetical situation and see what might occur if our planet decided to stop spinning. If the Earth suddenly stopped spinning, it would have some pretty dramatic effects both on a global scale and on ourselves. Let's start with the big one, the obvious one, the one that you probably already know about, which is that water would gather at the equator. This is because when the Earth was spinning, centrifugal force made it wider at the equator. So if it stopped spinning, all that water would rush to the middle of the planet, creating giant tsunami waves that would eventually settle down to form an enormous ocean around the equator. This ocean would be so large that much of Florida would be underwater, as well as other low-lying areas such as the Netherlands and Bangladesh. Not only that, but since there would be no more Coriolis effect, which is caused by the Earth's rotation, weather patterns would be drastically different. There would be no more hurricanes or tornadoes, but there would be more extreme weather events like snowstorms and blizzards. But what about us humans? What would happen to our bodies if the Earth suddenly stopped spinning? Well, here's where things get really interesting. You see, when the Earth was spinning, we were all flung outwards with it. This created a force called centrifugal force, which actually made us a little bit lighter. So if the Earth stopped spinning, we would actually weigh a little bit more. However, this wouldn't be the only change to our bodies. We are all mostly water, and since water would be rushing to the equator, so would we. In fact, all objects on Earth would be pulled towards the equator due to this process. This would mean that people living near the poles would have to move southwards in order to stay on land. Of course, they wouldn't be able to simply walk to the equator, but they would have no choice. Otherwise, they would get swept up in the massive tsunami waves and drown. But what if we were on the equator when the Earth stopped spinning? Would we be safe? Well, not exactly. You see, when the Earth was spinning, it was moving to the east very fast. In fact, it was moving so fast that we were all being flung around at over 900 miles per hour. That's about 1,500 kilometers per hour. If the Earth suddenly stopped spinning, all that momentum would be transferred to us and we would continue moving to the east at that same speed. This would mean that if you were standing on the equator when the Earth stopped spinning, you would literally be blown off your feet and flung into the giant ocean that had formed there. Luckily for us, though, this wouldn't happen all at once. It would take several days for the Earth to come to a complete stop, so we would have some time to prepare. We could build giant walls around the equator to keep us from being blown away, or we could just ride out the storm and see what happens. Either way, it would be quite the adventure. But what about after the dust had settled, so to speak? What would the world be like once the Earth had stopped spinning? For one thing, it would be much colder at the poles and much hotter near the equator. This is because the sun would now be directly overhead at the equator every day, making it unbearably hot. Meanwhile, the poles would be in darkness for 6 months of the year, making them freezing cold. Not only that, but the days and nights would be much longer. Since the Earth would no longer be rotating, it would take a full year for one day to pass. That means that every day would be 12 hours long, and every night would be 12 hours long. This would seriously mess with our sleep cycles and body clocks, and to make matters worse, there would be no more seasons. This is because the tilt of the Earth's axis is what causes the seasons. So, without any rotation, we would just have extreme heat at the equator and extreme cold at the poles all year round. But perhaps the most surprising effect of all would be that the sky would look different. You see, when the Earth was spinning, it created a slight bulge at the equator. This bulge meant that the horizon was slightly lower than it would be if the Earth wasn't spinning. So, if you were standing on the equator, the sky would look like this. But if you were standing at one of the poles, the sky would look like this. Now, you might not think that this is a big deal, but to astronauts and astronomers, it's actually a huge deal. You see, the shape of the Earth is what allows us to measure its circumference. It also allows us to calculate its volume and mass. If the Earth suddenly stopped spinning, our measurements of the planet would be thrown into chaos. Not only that, but it would also mess with our navigation systems. GPS and other forms of satellite navigation rely on the shape of the Earth to function properly. If the Earth stopped spinning, these systems would be rendered useless, at least until we figured out how to adjust for the new shape of the planet. So, as you can see, if the Earth stopped spinning, it would have some pretty far-reaching consequences. But what if it didn't stop completely? What if it just slowed down? In fact, what if it slowed down to half its current speed? This might not seem like a big deal, but even a slight decrease in the Earth's rotation speed could have some serious consequences. First of all, the Earth would begin to flatten at the poles and bulge out at the equator. This is because the centrifugal force created by the Earth's rotation is what makes it wider at the equator. If the Earth slowed down, that force would be reduced and the planet would begin to collapse in on itself at the poles. At the same time, it would expand in the opposite direction, creating a giant bulge. This might not sound like a big deal, but it would actually have some pretty major effects. The most obvious one would be that sea levels would rise. As the Earth bulges out at the equator, the oceans would be pulled with it, creating higher sea levels around the world. This could cause coastal cities to be flooded, as well as low-lying islands to be completely submerged. Not only that, but it would also mess with our climate. The Earth's rotation helps to regulate our planet's temperature by moving warm water from the equator to the poles. If the Earth slowed down, this process would be disrupted, leading to more extreme weather events and rising global temperatures. But what if the Earth didn't slow down to half its current speed, but instead slowed down to 1/10 of its current speed? What would happen then? Well, to answer that question, let's do a little thought experiment. Imagine that you're on a merry-go-round that's moving very fast. You feel like you're being flung off of it, but you hold on tight and stay on. Then the music stops and the merry-go-round slows to a stop. What do you experience? You feel like you're being pulled towards the center of the merry-go-round. This is because centripetal force is pulling you inwards towards the center. The same thing would happen if the Earth slowed down to 1/10 of its current speed. All the water in our bodies would be pulled towards the center of the planet. This would cause massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, as the Earth's crust is unable to withstand the sudden increase in pressure. The Earth would literally be ripped apart. So, as you can see, even a small change to the Earth's rotation speed could have some catastrophic consequences. But what if the Earth didn't rip itself apart? What if it just continued to slow down to 1/10 of its current speed? Well, the consequences would still be pretty bad. The atmosphere would begin to thin as the gases in the atmosphere are flung outwards with the Earth's rotation. Without that rotation, they would all be pulled towards the center of the planet, leaving the air very thin at the surface. Not only that, but the sky would no longer be blue. You see, the blue color of the sky is caused by a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering. And this is the same phenomenon that causes the sun to appear red or orange at sunrise and sunset. If the Earth stopped rotating, the sky would be filled with all colors of the rainbow, which would be pretty beautiful to look at, but it would also be pretty dangerous. The extra radiation from the sun would cause skin cancer rates to skyrocket. So, as you can see, even slowing down the Earth's rotation speed to 1/10 of its current speed would have some pretty serious consequences. But what if it didn't slow down to 1/10 of its current speed, but instead slowed down to 1/100th of its current speed? Well, at this point, it wouldn't even matter anymore. The Earth would be completely destroyed. The sun would engulf our planet, and we would be no more. So there you have it. That's what would happen if the Earth stopped spinning. Of course, this is just a hypothetical situation. The Earth isn't going to stop spinning anytime soon. But it is interesting to think about what would happen if it did. Thanks for watching.